to our last topic of today, which is about the relevance of the international standards to the global movement of seeds. And I would like to invite the chair of the ISEF Phytosanitary Committee and Seed Regulatory Lead for Asia in Bayer, Mr. Michael Leader. Michael, the floor is all yours.
Thank you very much, Rose, and it's a pleasure to be here today and to be able to present as part of this panel. And it's also an honor, I guess, to represent the seed industry and to work with and for some amazing people in this role. I value every day that the seed industry allows me to represent them in this way. I've got a very short time, I think, now, because I see that there are some questions coming up in the chat box, and I do want to make sure we have some time in the end to answer queries that are coming in. So I think I have I'll try and be quick today, but my presentation today is really about the relevance of the international phytosanitary standards to the global movement of seeds. Really what I want to talk about today is really how the issues that the seed industry is still finding nowadays with seed movement. And I guess that we're still, how we can work together, I guess, and how IPPC can really help to provide solutions to some of this. Now, I'm sure that those of you that are familiar with the ISF and have probably seen this slide a number of times, but I think it is important to continually to emphasize the actual special nature of the international seed movement and how really the reason why a special standard to call this out was probably needed. The reason is when seed is being produced for growers to finally plant at the end, for them to grow into food for the world, it's actually gone through a number of movements across borders. I guess it's not just like a particular fruit that's being grown in one country and going to another. The development of all of the parental lines in one country, production of parent seeds, processing of those parent seeds, production of hybrids, then processing of those hybrids, commercial packaging, then sending to a final market, or even 6 or 7 or 8 final markets from the same commercial packaging hub. And even after that, it can be re-exported again if it's not needed necessarily in that final market, but growers need it somewhere else because of conditions and environmental impacts. These things have an extreme effect on the cost and the ability to deliver seed. And every time you see one of those movements, there's requirements from governments to get it into those countries. If you add those costs to R&D and to development and to production, you can see that it's starting to make a quite costly seed movement and also quite extensive to try and understand the complexity involved from the country of origin to where the final country might be. So I guess from our perspective, there are some key phytosanitary issues that we're finding at the moment still really on this, is that even when a same pest is being, I guess, regulated by a number of different countries from a phytosanitary point of view, they can still have different requirements for that. One may want a field inspection, one might want an ELISA test, one may want a PCR or area freedom. Some might want 2 or 3 at the same time. To try and navigate those, even just for one pest, let alone a number, can prove quite problematic on this. And really there are different, I think the concept that we're going is that seed actually poses different risks depending on the intended use. Some plants or some seed is actually sent not even for planting, okay? It's sent for quality testing, for destructive sampling, which is different to being sown into the environment. Some may actually be going just for small trials in glass houses or even in one small area in a country, not for planting commercially across the country. And some, of course, yes, is seed for planting, for sowing, for commercial sale in the country. But all of these, depending on the end uses, require different phytosanitary risks. And I don't think all of these are taken necessarily on board by governments when they're trying to understand phytosanitary risk and making import requirements for seed, which just becomes a generic use pattern, which is also often incorporated, I guess, with the use of other plant parts as well. And I did mention the frequent re-exports, in that one particular seed lot or seed harvest can actually have multiple destinations. It can be stored in very healthy, cool conditions that it can remain viable for a number of years, and it can have multiple destinations. So that when we're actually growing a particular over a season, a harvest, we may not necessarily know the destination. So requiring field inspections as an automatic thing can be difficult on some aspects, but understanding the reality and how to make these requirements would be very useful for the seed industry. Again, and I'll get onto this, but which pests are a concern as well on some of this? Where is seed actually a risk relating to certain pests? Some NPPOs are looking at the entire, I guess, species, as opposed to seed specifically as a pathway, which is actually a reduced risk in terms of all the number of pests that might be associated with a particular crop. And I guess Meryl did touch on this, but there are well-established industry quality management systems that already reduce phytosanitary risk. We'd like to see them actually endorsed and adapted and understood by governments as well, and incorporated and considered in some of their risk assessments as well. We're already reducing and mitigating risk, so maybe some of the more restrictive phytosanitary requirements and non-harmonized requirements may not be necessary when further consideration is given to these things. And here's just an example. The International Seed Federation has actually got something called the Regulated Pest Risk Initiative. You can get access to this on the website, www.worldseed. And what we've actually seen is gone through certain crops that are currently regulated with phytosanitary requirements in the world. Somewhere, looked at the total number of pests that might be required to be addressed at some stage if you want to meet all countries' requirements for that particular species, and then had a look in the scientific literature whether seed is actually a pathway. And you can see on this that even for the 11 that we've looked at now, on average around 77%, this crop is not even a host for the species or for the pest. But even if it is a host, the seed is actually not the specific pathway either. And so really, if you just look at seed, 70% of regulation right now globally probably doesn't need to be there. And the pathway not proven, we can depend about your appropriate level of protection and discuss that aspect. But this is quite concerning, and it really would be useful if we do actually take the time to have a look at seed specifically and look at the risks. We do know we've looked at 11. There are a couple of others that should come out this year as well, corn and eggplant. So stay tuned for those also. I'll just give you one example quickly on this. Just recently, there's been a particular virus, tomato brown rugose fruit virus, that has become an emerging risk and a problem and of concern to governments. And now I think over 20 countries have decided to regulate this one pest at the moment for moving of tomato and pepper seed into their country. But of course, requirements are not consistent and they're not harmonized. Some require 2, 3 measures to be applied rather than just either lab test or area freedom or field inspection. Some are allowing for field trials only, but many do not, and many are requiring testing of mother plants as well at the same time as doing that. There's unique sample sizes, even if it's just a lab test. Some require particular protocols. Some require 20,000 seeds. Some require 4,600. Each time, even though we've done a test, we might have to do 3, 4, or 5 different requirements for the same pest to get it across into different countries. This is, proving almost cost prohibitive when people are starting to do this. And we just want to see if there is some way that we can actually try to bring some order to this as well. Problem is, many of these measures have also been introduced as emergency measures. So you can't comment on these through the WTO. And they really haven't gone through a full pest risk analysis. And we're still waiting for the final requirements. And some of these can be in place for a long time before we actually see a conclusion and certainty on these requirements as well. So I think if you go to the ISF website now, we've made a statement calling for less restrictive and I guess harmonized requirements for the movement of seed and some clarity on what's required. And I guess one important thing as well is that even though we're requiring testing and requirements offshore, some countries are now also retesting using different protocols onshore at 100%. So we're having more and more tests, even on the same thing. And if you require a requirement offshore, then hopefully you will trust that, and the onshore piece can be at a more random requirement as opposed to 100%. Some responses we've had to this where companies have not been, or governments haven't had validated test protocols or other things to understand and get ready for these, is that they said, well, that's okay. When you're ready, just store the seed, and when it's ready, you can bring it in. The reality is that seed is a perishable commodity. It's a living thing, and it needs to move quickly, and it needs to be stored in appropriate conditions if it's going to remain viable. And usually it's produced just in time for orders. And so putting it in places where we haven't actually planned for that storage, where there isn't the right environment, can affect quality and germination and other aspects, and may affect the grower's ability at the end to be able to use that seed fully. And I don't think that is necessarily always picked up by NPPOs as well. And so this is where we see the relevance of ISPM 38, I guess, because it provides opportunities to actually talk about seed, to advance science-based and harmonized regulation of seed movement. It specifically calls out seed movement, which is really important. It provides guidance on conducting pest risk analysis for seed. It actually does list the different types of uses that seed might be going to and the different types of risk that might be associated with those. So it does say that it should be looking at equivalency of measures that should be appropriate to the assessed pest risk. It practices use in seed production. Again, it does recognize that these may be sufficient. You may not necessarily need to add other requirements to address pest risk if you look at the way seed is being produced. And I'll bring in other ISPMs as well, because again, ISPM 1 clearly states and shows the equivalency of phytosanitary measures is important. And it's particularly important, I hope I've shown here, for the international movement of seed. Look, it does also say that it encourages NPPOs to exchange additional official phytosanitary information. It re-emphasizes what ISPM 12 said about re-exports. It would be great if we could actually get governments in exporting countries to not just put the actual first destination, but help to do field inspections and other aspects for other countries as well, when requested by the company, because we may well need to move from that processing country to other countries as well. And I think it does actually give a reality of things, that when a country's requirements are put in place, they need to think about what the impact that might have on the exporting countries. Can they do field inspections? Well, not really for seed already harvested. If I'm going to bring a new lab test in, actually the country that's the exporting government will need to validate that test as well. Is this something that they validated? Or is there going to be another 6 month to a year delay for that to happen? These things, this is why equivalency is important as well. All of this is highlighted in ISPM 38, and why we actually see that it's really relevant, and we're very excited to see that as being adopted and now starting, hopefully, to start the discussion to implement it in a bit more detail globally. And just, I'll leave you with some final thoughts. We're always willing to work alongside NPPOs. We have been doing this in the development of ISPM 38, and we will continue doing it. Healthy seed is also our goal. Healthy seed to growers is our goal. We remain committed to a vision where the world gets the best quality seed, and the best quality seed is accessible to all. We support food security and sustainable agriculture. And I hope what you've seen in the first 3 presenters here is great examples of how we can work together, and we look forward to working with you more going forward. So with that, Rose, thank you very much, and I'll pass the floor back to you.